we still have a lot of confidence in our ability to develop players, whether they can play or not. I think you guys will see that kind of a remarkable transformation of Anthony. You know, it's kind of all coming together for him. I mean, he's as talented as anyone we've ever drafted since I've been here. In terms of just natural gifts. I mean, he's not the player Damon CJ was, but in terms of just natural, God-given basketball ability, Anthony's as gifted as anybody I've ever drafted. So, you know, we're expecting big things from him, and I don't want to heap too much pressure on him, but when we watch him on a daily basis, we say things, you know, you guys just don't have the luxury of having that kind of access. And so, like I said, Nassir will develop. If he develops to the point where Terry trusts he can help us win games and contribute at a team that was in the Western Conference Finals, we'll see him on the court. If it takes a little bit longer, we'll remain patient the way we have with our other draft picks.
You said this year was the best player available, but
I'm sorry.
You said this year was at the top of your board when it got there, but you also said he was a great fit. Is there a decision where fit comes into that at all?
You know, the way that we handle our draft is we tier the draft. It's not just a straight 1 through 60. So, you know, within the tier, if it's a close enough, the idea is that you have, say, 3 or 4 guys where the talent level is equal, and then they're ranked within that tier based on positional need. You're never going to leave a guy you think is more talented on the board regardless of position, but when it gets to the point where it's basically a coin flip, you know, you do factor need in. But this wasn't a need pick. You know, this wasn't a plug and play and he's going to replace a guy, you know, that we may lose to free agency. This was best player available that just also happened to be, you know, a small forward.
How much did you dabble in kind of trades and trying to move up or second round?
We didn't try to move up because we liked how the draft was breaking for us. You know, honestly, the guys we would have moved up for were a bunch of guys that were actually still available when we selected. It was actually disappointing because, you know, as happy as we were to get Nassir, there were guys we kind of thought we were going to take that, you know, slid kind of past us, so it changes our expectation level. But, you know, we tried to get back into the second round. There were some really talented players there. We do have some roster spot issues in terms of making sure there would be a roster spot available for the player. But the asking price got a little bit insane. When other teams saw what was on the board and teams were asking for 4 second-round picks and protected first-round pick, and, you know, you just can't get caught up in the draft fever at some point. You've got to remember, this is a very small acquisition for a much bigger picture that we've got to keep our eye on the ball when it comes to, you know, July 1st and building our roster.
I know you guys scout these guys, I mean, everyone on the board throughout the season. Did you ever get eyes on him in a game?
Oh yeah, you know, I had seen Carolina multiple times, but then late in the season, I spent an entire weekend there. They played Miami on a Saturday, stayed, watched practice. They played Virginia on a Monday. You know, half the league was there for that grouping because of who Virginia had and who Carolina had. So, you know, honestly, I wasn't scouting as much for him as well as we were playing. I never thought he would be the target of the scout. But there were certainly other players on that roster that we were targeting or the opponents. So, you know, you look at everyone. I mean, we've talked about this in the past. You know, when we drafted Damian Lillard, I was with the Clippers. You know, we were heading for, you know, a very high playoff seed that year. We certainly weren't looking to pick in the lottery. But you still do your job and you scout. So it was easy when I got to Portland to kind of transition all that information over to our process here in terms of selection range. So, you know, you've got to scout everybody. You just never know when the phone is going to ring. You never know when someone's going to make a trade to move up, and you've got to know 1 through 60. I mean, you know, our guys are back there right now because we're out at this point. I mean, that anybody we've called on now, we know they have homes for those players. Like I said, we're not looking to buy in for a second just for another development prospect. But you know, you just got to you've got to know the draft top to bottom because you just never know.
You didn't have really meetings with him, so to speak.
Right.
So how do you know about his character and how he'll that you spoke?
Well, you know, it's all the research. You know, the investigators we use to do background checks. You know, our relationship with the coaching staff in North Carolina, relationships with high school coaches. You know, the guys that run all the high school events. You know, scouting him at the McDonald's All-American game. You know, we have people there watching the practices. You know, talking to those guys. You know, Team USA. Guys on our roster, you know, like guys like Anthony, you know, who have a relationship with him. But you're right. I mean, it wasn't a deep dive with him because it didn't seem reasonable that he would get to 25. But I can tell you this, as far as our investigations, he graded at exceptional and is one of the highest rated guys that we've had in terms of our database.
In terms of
Character, his background, his family, you're talking about a National Merit Scholar, the salutatorian of his high school class. I mean, that's a pretty unique skill set for a guy who has been in the top 5 or 6 of his high school class from a basketball perspective his whole career. So he's got the whole package on and off the court. There's going to be a learning, phase for him. There's things we need to do skill-wise, and there were definitely bumps in the road at Carolina. I don't think he accomplished what he thought he would have when he got there. But that's why he got to 25, and it's our job to get him back up to the ceiling that we all saw when he entered Carolina back in September.
Safe to say he's going to play in Summer League with Anthony and those guys?
Yeah, Billy Branch is happy. Our Summer League team's getting better by the minute. So, Jim Moran's got to defend his title. Otherwise, he might be on the hot seat.
Can you talk about him on the floor a little more, like what he does, his handle, for instance, his defensive abilities, and also whether or not someday he could be a multi-positional type player, especially defensively?
See, the old school guys always want to talk defense. Yeah, I mean, look, physically, he's a beast physically. He measures smaller, I think, than people thought in terms of height, but he's got a 7'1", 7'2" wingspan, covers a lot of ground, really fast, twitchy, gets off the floor. I think he can fight a lot of the undersized 4s, in the post. He basically played 4 behind Cam Johnson at Carolina. He's got an emerging handle offensively. He's comfortable facing the hoop. He sees the game as a perimeter guy. His length is really going to be an asset. He gets deflections. He gets in passing lanes. Like I said, physically he'll fight you. Got to get better as a team defender. In terms of IQ a little bit and instincts. That'll come with some time. But he's got a ceiling there. And I think he can be multi-positional because I think he can guard up. To the small ball 4s. I think he's got the quickness laterally. And to be able to defend on the perimeter against a lot of the 3s and even some 2s at times, the bigger 2s. I think he can play with those guys. So I think it gives us a lot of switchability, with him. I think that's what he'll grow into. I think he's a great pairing, with guys like Anthony and Gary and they're completely different. We've always tried, since I've been here, to populate the back of our bench with young emerging players that can grow into rotation guys here, guys that are too talented that if they pan out for us to maybe get in free agency or unrealistic to trade for at times. We just think, and so to have other guys that have grown like that and have guys that can push each other like Ant and Gary and he is going to be a real attribute for him. It's not just going to be all veterans. I mean, he has guys like, Dame and CJ and guys like that he can look up to. But he also has guys that are on the same timeline as him he can work with on a daily basis where it's not just he's over here, set off to the side doing development. He's got a group to kind of grow with. Not dissimilar, to when it was CJ, Will Barton, Alan Crabb.
A couple more, then we're going to wrap it up.
What was the conversation like with him after the pick was made? Because for us, he talked about how it ended up being a blessing in disguise to end up with Portland because of the fit.
You mean it wasn't the outfit? Yeah. It wasn't. No, he really appreciative, really polite kid. Sometimes you get a guy that slips a bunch of spots, perception-wise. Whether he slipped or he clearly didn't slip. He got drafted where he was supposed to get drafted, but relative to mock drafts and preseason projections, he might have slipped. And there's times once in a while guys are salty about that. And they're harboring ill will. They're more worried about where they didn't go than where they did go. And he just felt like it was a blessing, that to get to us, to get drafted. I think he and his representatives know we have a reputation of taking care of young players here, that they're treated well, they develop, they're given an opportunity to grow. And I think, at the end of the day, I've talked to agents about this in the past, and we had a couple of kids in that we talked to about this, is don't get caught up in where you get drafted. Get caught up in who drafts you and what the plan is for you. Draft night, walking across the stage 10 picks earlier, if you're in a bad situation, they don't have a plan for you, they don't develop young players, what good does it do you? We can all point to guys, we had this conversation with Alan Crabb at one point. He thought he was a first-round pick, he went 31. He did everything he was supposed to do 3 years later, he had $70 million. So, you know, like I said, we think we're a great home for young players. We had multiple agents trying to steer guys to us at one point in the draft because they can see the path that these guys go on and how they're nurtured and developed. And it may take a little longer at times to get on the floor, but once they do and they've built that level of trust with the coaching staff and they're ready to contribute, you know, there really isn't any looking back for them, and they've all succeeded.
He had said that he had struggled initially to adjust at Carolina to, you know, some of the things that coaches want to do, where he was supposed to be on the floor and stuff. What were your thoughts on the way he adjusted during his time there, not only to what he was supposed to do on the floor, but also coming off the bench?
Well, I give him a lot of credit. You know, Carolina is an interest. They're a unique system. You know, the way they play, it can be complicated at times. It's a different style than maybe they've seen in high school. What they're being asked to do is different. And they were an elite team. You know, at times during the year, they looked like the #1 team in the country, and they had seniors. You know, they had some older guys that were playing a similar position to him. So, you know, I give him credit. You know, he went into North Carolina without a sense of entitlement as a guy who came in as a 6th-ranked player in America. And, you know, at one point, I mean, there were guys when he walked out of McDonald's practices thinking he could be a top 3 pick. So, you know, for him to be able to sublimate his game and his desire to play more minutes and play 18 minutes at Carolina to help them win and play a little bit out of position. I mean, most of his minutes came behind Cam Johnson at 4, some 3-man minutes sprinkled in and out. And when he got out on the floor, he competed and played at a high level. You know, he didn't try to do too much. You know, he didn't try to, you know, go get numbers per se. I mean, he played the right way and he played within their system. And, you know, like I said, they've got a unique style of basketball there, and it takes a while to adjust to it. You know, especially when you're used to, you know, coming out of AAU in high school where he had the ball in his hands more. He was more of a go-to guy. He was a featured guy. And now, you know, you're playing that early offense, early transition offense, get out, run. You know what I mean? It's, you know, that secondary break that they run, it takes a while to get used to it. You've got to get used to playing without the ball, which for a lot of kids coming out of the AAU system now, that's a difficult transition for guys that are used to being featured. So, you know, I think it was a good learning experience, and it'll transition well for us. You know, we don't have a lot of guys that play without the ball, you know, play with the ball here. You know, we run a lot of pick and rolls, but we also expect our perimeter players to move without the ball, share the ball, a lot of ball movement, player movement. So I think that kind of an indoctrination that he got at Carolina will serve him well when he gets into our style of play.
Yeah, we're going to wrap it up there.
Can I say one more?
Yeah.
Just any emotions of having your first draft without Paul?
Yeah. I don't want to get sappy, but I found out today that I had 100 voicemails on my office line because I've never used it, because everybody uses my cell. And it was ironic, you know, they went way back, right? They went way back, and there was actually one from Paul, and it was a pre-draft, you know, email, and it just said, "Hey, it's Neil, it's Paul. Give me a call on my cell. I'll try you on your cell. Just want to talk about. I won't say who the players were because we didn't have drafted them. Want to catch up on these guys. Was watching some film, so that it's hard. You know, I don't think there's an environment. Look, as ecstatic as he would have been sitting courtside with us going to the Western Conference Finals, and seeing that plan that was put in place 4 years ago, you know, when we kind of reset the roster, nothing made him happier than being in this room tonight. And it was an interesting day for us today because what we do is we lock our boards in Wednesday night. We don't want any day of draft, you know, fluctuations and second guessing and being influenced by, you know, outside voices. And, you know, so we sent our stuff to Jody last night and said, this is our order. This is how we're going to go. We're locked in at 25 if we don't make a move. And we played it by that script. But, you know, we missed it because, you know, Paul would come and, you know, he'd stop at the pancake house and he'd have his pancakes and his apple fritter, and he'd get here around 10, and, you know, we'd find a bunch of guys to get in the room. We'd sit here and watch film with them, and he loved watching tape. And, you know, then we'd get back in the room, he'd look at the boards again, and, you know, he'd shoot off to Powell's. You know, he'd get bored with us, and then he would shoot off and he'd go to Powell's for a couple of hours, and you know, he had his routine, and it was fun, and it kept us engaged because, you know, for us, you know, once we locked the boards in last night, we had trade calls today, and, you know, we were receiving calls, and we kind of chummed the waters around the league the last couple of days, see if there were any deals more for July 1st, you know, more bigger deals. But it really was a different experience for us today without Paul kind of, You know, can we get him? Can we get him? Move up. You know, can we buy a second? Go ahead, but we'll give him $4 million, give him $5 million. You know, like, but he's up there. He's still on the board. Like, you know, it just, and no matter what the plan was going in, you know, Paul, he always said he was an all of the above guy. You know, he'd say, well, we have these 3 guys, whichever one we get to, and he would say, well, I'm all of the above. Like, can we get them all? And you know, and it was different. And you know, I think everybody in the room felt a huge void. It just didn't have the same energy. You know, we get not stale, Jason, but we can get a little agnostic about it. You know, you spend 2 months working on it after the season, and you're battling and you're grinding down the board and you're watching tape and you're doing your intel and your interviews and your workouts, and after a while, like, you know, you do your board, right? And then there was always this infusion of energy when Paul came in, and you had to almost start from scratch because he liked the action. Right, like he didn't want to know the boards were set, right? He wanted to scramble it up again, you know?
I mean, I feel like this would have been a pick that he would have been like,
oh my God. He would have been losing it. Like if he would have looked and said, well, we have him over here. Can he really get to us? Can he really get to us? But, you know, it was, you know, we didn't have the other thing to go move up, you know, to get Nassir. We were going to have to just have it break our way. That would have been completely unacceptable if Paul was here. Once he saw which tier he was in and what tier we were selecting from, believe me, like money would have been thrown around and future seconds and whatever else we needed to do to make sure we absolutely got him, instead of being content to get the other guys we'd anticipated getting at, you know, 4 o'clock when the draft started. So, you know, I think it's, you know, we haven't been through this grief cycle yet, right? You know, we got through the season, then the playoffs. You know, now we've been through a draft, but, you know, tomorrow he would have been on a plane to Wimbledon, and tonight on the way home he would have been sending me every writer that wrote up whether we drafted well or didn't draft well, and what people were saying, and any comments, and what are your thoughts, and then we would have gotten into free agency, and, you know, have you heard from Dame, have you heard from CJ, do they like him, and, you know, like, and you know, and we talked about it tonight, you know, it just sucks. Right, you know, for 9 months, the way things have gone over the last 9 months, he deserved that. You know, I was down at City Hall, and I know we're going longer, Jim, but I was down at City Hall for the proclamation, you know, that Terry and I went to, and Dwight was there, and I said, you know, I'm glad they were recognizing how lucky the city was for all those years to have Paul, and to have a big market owner that supported this team as if we were in New York or LA, you know what I mean, and never considering payroll as a factor or an impediment to building a team, and, you know, driving everyone, you know, to make deals and build the roster, and, you know, and he really did do it. He really just believed in the Portland Trailblazers. It was his famous, no offense to the Seahawks, but it was his favorite property. And, you know, that was his firstborn, basically, besides Microsoft. And, you know, for him not to be able to share in that, it's sad, and when we've all been kind of dealing with it, it's been tough. All right, thanks, guys.